studios in New York City. This is Charlie Rose.
Paul Simon is one of America's most respected singer-songwriters. Nobel winner Derek Walcott is one of the world's greatest living poets. Mark Morris is one of the modern dance world's most renowned choreographers. Those three have joined together for the Broadway musical The Capeman. Set in New York, it is based on the true story of a 16-year-old boy who killed two other teens in 1959. Songs from The Capeman is Paul Simon's first album in 7 years. It is a personal rendition of songs from the musical. I am pleased to have the three of them on this broadcast to talk about this event. Welcome. It's great to have you.
Nice to be here.
Tell me how this came about, this story for you. I know you've told the story before, but perhaps for somebody in my audience hasn't heard it.
Well, first of all, I remembered it from 1959. It was a big story in 1959.
You were living in Queens or somewhere at that time?
Yes. Yeah. And it was front page of all the papers for about a week till he was caught.
Tell me the story.
In late August, a group of Puerto Rican kids in their teens who were called the Vampires, a gang called the Vampires from the Upper West Side of Manhattan, went down into Hell's Kitchen looking for a gang, an Irish gang called the Norsemen. And in this group of vampires was Salvador Agron, who was dressed that night in a black cape with a red lining. And they came into a playground on 46th Street, still there, the playground's still there, 46th Street, between 9th and 10th. And a few kids were sitting around. It was late at night, after midnight, late August. And the kids didn't belong to any gang, but they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and these kids were ready to rumble, and Agron stabbed two boys, and he killed two boys. And he was described by the other victims in the park as this tall Puerto Rican kid who was wearing a black cape with a red lining. And his accomplice in crime was a little guy with a stingy brim hat who had an umbrella that he used as a weapon. So the newspapers called them the Cape Man and the Umbrella Man. That's how the name came about. That's the story.
Front page of all the papers.
All the papers, and there were 7 papers in New York at that time, so more of a tabloid story than a New York Times type story, but big, and also on television because we have footage of Agron. Anyway, he fled. He went up to the Bronx. It took the mayor added 1,400 cops to the force, and there was a massive manhunt, and they captured Agron and Hernandez, the Umbrella Man, in the Bronx, and they brought him back down to the precinct where they were nearly lynched by the local, by the neighborhood people, because the boys from the neighborhood were obviously friends of all these people. Agron was apparently remorseless, said, I don't care if I burn, my mother can watch, and, really lines like right out of a movie somewhere, and some kind of thing. And the city, the papers had a field day. He was the personification of juvenile delinquency and the breakdown of society, etc. As we were coming to the end of the Eisenhower era and right into the dawn of liberalism. He was convicted of murder, and he was sentenced to the electric chair at age 16, the youngest. Never sentenced at 16. Served a few years on death row, and his sentence was commuted by Rockefeller, or the governor then, commuted to life in prison. That's basically the story. To me, the idea came to me in 1989, like that, from some place. I didn't read it or wasn't reminded of it. It just came to me.
Like almost 30 years later.
Well, checking your math. You got me.
I got you. Yeah. So it comes to you.
The Capeman, that would be an interesting idea for a musical, because there's doo-wop. I'm in the 50s, an era that I like. Latin music in conjunction with doo-wop is a nice bit of sound. That's a good idea. Why don't I begin to research this and see where it leads me? And that's really how I began.
So you began to essentially look at a narrative and think about writing songs.
That's right. I got the newspaper articles and read about it. I began to to audition people to make like an extended doo-wop group, 8 or 9 singers instead of the typical 4. I went into the studio with Eddie Palmieri, the Latin jazz pianist, and began to, learn about different Latin rhythms and began to think about how this story would be told. Eventually, in that year, I found people who knew Agron and his family, and Agron had died in '86, natural causes.
Having served good time in prison, having gotten out and been a model citizen. Yes?
Yeah, yes, that's true. He served 20 years in prison. Well, he escaped. He absconded in the middle of his term. But he ended up serving 20 years, got out in '79, and he died in '86. But I came to know his sister, and from his sister, I got his writing. And he wrote voluminously about his life and about many subjects. He was very political.
Marxist.
Yeah, he was Marxist. Yeah, he was Christian in his death row days. Then he was revolutionary. He basically went through the changes of the 60s and 70s. Now you may ask, why would that be an attractive character to write a musical about?
Took it right out of my head. You could do this show, Paul. You could do this show. Why would it be an attractive idea? Because, in a sense, you're glorifying, in part, some might say, by song, the life of a killer. Thought that yourself, haven't you, Derek?
Not really.
Never?
No, never glorifying, no.
Okay, but giving...
Perhaps examining, maybe.
Examining?
I mean, yes. I
Okay.
mean, there are too many famous works in literature and in music that examine the life of, Macbeth had a life. I mean, it's a great play,
Let me come back to this and come back here, because I want to get to the collaboration. So you were there in a studio recording. How long, how many years before you bring together your collaborators?
No, I recorded on and off for a year. At the same time that I was doing that, I was recording drums in Brazil, and that became the Rhythm of the Saints album, which progressed at a normal pace for me, and superseded my work on the Capeman because, first of all, it was a massive amount of material, and second of all, I really didn't know how to structure a play or a theater piece. So I finished I turned my attention to finishing my album, and then I went on the road for a good year and a half or something, and didn't return full-time to the play until 1993. But in the meantime, Derek and I met in 1990. When I was working on, I feel like I'm hogging this entire conversation.
No, don't worry about that. I'll take care of that.
While I was working on the Rhythm of the Saints, taking these drum tracks, and then I would be going into the studio with West African guitarists and American players, and shaping this album. And then I would go and I'd work on this at home. And when I would take my break, my typical work hours would be like 10 till 4. So somewhere around 1 o'clock, I'd take a break. But rather than reading the newspaper or getting on the phone and talking to anybody, and breaking where I was at in terms of the southern hemispheric environment, musical environment, I began to read Derek's poetry, so that I wasn't thinking about my work, but I hadn't left it and returned to New York City and then that life, which I thought was going to be disrupted. So I became a big fan of Derek Walcott. And then a mutual friend told me that Derek was giving a reading at the 92nd Street Y, and that's when we met.
You have written plays, you have staged plays, you have directed plays.
Yeah.
You're here in this writing lyrics.
No, the book and lyrics.
The book and the lyrics,
Yeah.
Why
No, I mean book and sharing lyrics, obviously. Sharing
Right.
everything.
Why'd you want to do this? What is it about
Why
this
did I-
story? What story do you want to tell?
I always wanted the piece to be an entity, like a sung-through thing, so there's no dialogue in it. So what had to be conveyed in the song. So the dialogue is in the music.
Yeah.
And there were once or twice we came to a part in which you needed, definitely for the sake of the plot or scene, to have this exchange in dialogue. And I said, well, we're going to sing this. No, we have to sing this. And first there was a little hesitancy, but then once that began, there was some very beautiful passages of exchange, of dialogue between a sung-through thing. I wanted it to be a kind of Simon work. That's right, as a musical.
And when did Mr. Morris come into this picture? First as a choreographer.
Yes, first as a choreographer, although we always wanted him to be the director as well as the choreographer. We always thought that director-choreographer would be ideal in this situation because we thought that the motion of the piece had to be blended with the music in such a way that there was a flow going in the same way that an album has a flow to it, the way or a concert set. You program a set in such a way that it has a feel and a flow to it. Well, that's the way the show was going to be, and we wanted it to rhythmically be that way as well. So the choreography seemed to me, or the motion, whichever way. I'm not really going to make a distinction between choreography, motion. That seemed to be, crucial. So when I went to see Mark's, the first time I saw Mark's work at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, it was 15 months ago, 14 months ago.
Something like that.
Yeah, and then went to meet Mark afterwards, and I said, I'm working on this piece with Derek Walcott, and I don't even know whether you would be interested at all in. I don't even know if the idea of this thing would be of interesting, but maybe you would be. I'd like to show it to you, and then you could tell me your reaction, whatever that might be, And much to my surprise and delight, he said yes, he was interested in hearing it. So I played the piece, and he said, "Yeah, I like this. I like to think about this for a while." And he thought about it for about a week, and then he said, "Yes, I would like to do this, but just as a choreographer, not as a director." He said, "I don't want to be the director."
So you asked him about both from day one.
Yeah.
Now, did he say it like that? I don't know if you're going to... This is Derek Walcott, and is that the way he said it?
Yes.
Hesitant, almost...
Do you want to come over and listen to what I've been working on for a really long time? It's like, sure, I wanted to see his apartment for one thing. But, I also... and
would have been my sentiments.
yeah, it's like, oh, this is nice.
I'm not going to turn this down. This may be a turkey, but I'm not going to turn it down.
Right. But also, to be frank, I get a lot of unsolicited recordings from various composers that we were born to work together. You must choreograph this right now. It's like, okay, fine. So I did, it wasn't like getting another cassette in the mail. Yes. And it was Paul, whose music I've known for a long time. And so I went and listened to it, and he talked through it. And it appealed to me directly, immediately.
And you gave it motion.
Yes. Yes, motion. That's the perfect thing.